She found him sleeping upright in the saddle, a twin baby in each arm, too exhausted to breathe properly. The Nebraska sun was setting blood red across the prairie when Evelyn Carter saw what should have been impossible: a lone cowboy swaying on his horse, clutching two infants like they were the last piece of heaven in a hell-bent world. By the time she reached him, Luke Herron had already crossed into that strange country between waking and dying, where a man's grip on life depends entirely on what he's holding on to. Before we ride into the story of mercy and murder, of love born from tragedy, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across this wide country of ours. The prairie grass whispered secrets that spring evening in 1876. Secrets carried on a wind that smelled of coming rain and distant gunpowder. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch of the ranch house her late husband had built, watching the horizon swallow the sun whole, when she saw him, a dark figure wavering against the bleeding sky like a mirage born of heat and heartache. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, the way the setting sun played games with a widow's lonely eyes. But the figure kept coming, slow and deliberate, and as it drew closer, Evelyn's hand flew to her throat. She recognized the horse first, Dusty, the gray gelding that belonged to Luke Herron, the quiet cowboy who'd worked her late brother's ranch and had stayed on after her husband Thomas passed 6 months ago. But something was terribly wrong. Luke wasn't riding the way a man should ride. He was swaying in the saddle like a drunkard, his body tilted at an angle that defied gravity and good sense. Evelyn lifted her skirts and ran down the porch steps, her boots kicking up dust as she rushed toward him. The evening air was thick and golden, filled with the sound of crickets beginning their nightly symphony. But all Evelyn could hear was the thundering of her own heart. "Luke!" she called out, but her voice seemed swallowed by the vastness of the Nebraska plains. "Luke Herron!" As she got closer, running now with abandon, she saw what made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Luke wasn't just exhausted, he was clutching something. No, two somethings pressed against his chest. Two small bundles wrapped in what looked like blood-stained cloth. "Good heavens," Evelyn whispered, the words barely escaping her lips as she reached Dusty's side. The horse had stopped of his own accord, as if knowing his rider had reached the end of his strength. Steam rose from the animal's flanks, and his sides heaved with exhaustion. This horse had been ridden hard and long, pushed beyond what any decent man would ask. But Luke Herron wasn't any man, and what Evelyn saw next would prove that beyond any doubt. The cowboy sat rigid in his saddle, his spine straight as a fence post despite the exhaustion that pulled at every line of his weathered face. His arms were locked in a position that looked painful, each one cradling a small bundle. And from those bundles came the unmistakable sound that Evelyn hadn't heard on this ranch in more than 5 years, the mewling cry of babies. "Luke," Evelyn said again, this time more gently, reaching up to touch his boot. "Luke, can you hear me?" His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths that spoke of a man pushed far past his limits. Dirt and dried blood covered his clothes. Whether his own or someone else's, Evelyn couldn't tell. His face was burned raw by sun and wind, his lips cracked and bleeding. He looked like a man who'd ridden through the gates of hell itself and somehow made it back to tell the tale. But he didn't speak. He didn't open his eyes. He simply sat there, sleeping upright in the saddle, his arms locked around those two precious bundles, as if all the demons in creation couldn't make him let go. "Dear God," Evelyn breathed, her hands shaking as she reached up. She had to get those babies. Whatever had happened, wherever Luke had been, those infants needed care and they needed it now. But as her fingers touched the first bundle, Luke's arms tightened reflexively, even in his sleep, even in his exhaustion. "It's all right," Evelyn murmured, speaking to him the way she might speak to a spooked horse. "It's Evelyn, Luke. You're home now. You're safe. Let me have them." She tugged gently on the first bundle, and this time Luke's grip loosened. The baby, a girl, Evelyn saw immediately, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the world, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 months old. She was wrapped in what had once been a woman's shawl, now torn and stained with dirt and worse things. Evelyn cradled the infant against her chest with one arm and reached for the second baby. This one was identical to the first. Twins, she realized with a start. Two baby girls who should have been sleeping peacefully in a cradle somewhere, not clutched in the arms of an exhausted cowboy in the middle of the Nebraska prairie. As soon as both babies were free from his grasp, Luke's body began to sag. He tilted forward in the saddle, his hands dropping to the saddle horn, and Evelyn barely had time to step back before he simply gave up. His body went limp, and he would have fallen face first into the dirt if Evelyn hadn't grabbed his arm. "Help!" she screamed toward the bunkhouse, where she knew at least two ranch hands were finishing their evening meal. "Someone help me!" The twins began to cry in earnest now, their small voices piercing the evening air. Evelyn struggled to hold them both while supporting Luke's weight, and for a moment she thought all three of them would end up in the dust. But then she heard running footsteps, and Charlie Redmond, one of the older hands, came rushing around the corner of the barn. "Mrs. Carter, what in blazes—" Charlie stopped short when he saw the scene before him. "Is that Luke? And are those—" "Babies," Evelyn confirmed, her voice tight with strain. "Help me get him down, Charlie. Carefully now. I don't know what condition he's in." Together they eased Luke from the saddle. The cowboy was dead weight, his body completely slack with exhaustion. They laid him out on the ground, and Evelyn pressed her ear to his chest, listening past the screaming of the infants for the steady thump of his heart. It was there. Faint, but there. And his breathing, though shallow and labored, was regular enough. "He's alive," she said, relief flooding through her. "Charlie, help me get him inside. And someone needs to take care of Dusty. That horse has been ridden half to death." "Yes, ma'am." Charlie whistled sharply, and another hand, young Billy Preston, came running from the bunkhouse. "Billy, take Dusty to the barn, cool him down slow, give him water but not too much, and get that saddle off him. Then come to the house. We're going to need all hands." As Billy led the exhausted horse away, Charlie and Evelyn worked together to half-carry, half-drag Luke toward the house. The twins continued their crying, a sound that seemed to pierce straight through Evelyn's chest. She hadn't heard that sound, that particular desperate wail of hungry babies, since her own daughter had died of fever 5 years ago. The wound had never quite healed, and now it felt fresh as yesterday's cut. But there was no time for old grief. These babies were alive and they needed her. They got Luke through the front door and into the sitting room, laying him out on the horsehair sofa that Thomas had ordered all the way from Chicago before he died. Luke's boots left dirt trails across Evelyn's clean floor, but she didn't care. She was too busy trying to figure out what to do with two screaming infants and an unconscious cowboy. "Charlie, get me water," she commanded. "Clean water and lots of it, and send someone to fetch Doc Morrison from town if he's there. If not, we'll manage on our own." "Yes, ma'am." Charlie hurried toward the kitchen, and Evelyn was left alone with Luke and the twins. She laid the babies side by side on the rug near the fireplace, quickly checking them over for injuries. They seemed unharmed, dirty, hungry, and frightened, but whole. Their cries were strong, which was a good sign. Weak babies didn't cry like that. Satisfied that they weren't in immediate danger, Evelyn turned her attention to Luke. She knelt beside the sofa, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt. The fabric was stiff with dried blood and dirt, and it took effort to get it open. When she finally did, she gasped. His chest and sides were covered in bruises, some old and yellowing, others fresh and purple-black. There were cuts, too, long scrapes that looked like they'd come from thorns or barbed wire. But no bullet holes, thank God. No deep wounds that would explain all the blood on his clothes. "Whose blood is this?" Evelyn whispered, running her hands over his ribs, checking for breaks. Luke groaned softly at her touch, but didn't wake. "What happened out there, Luke Heron? What did you ride through to get here?" Charlie returned with a basin of water and clean rags, and together they began the work of cleaning Luke up. They stripped off his shirt completely, revealing more bruises and cuts. His hands were the worst, torn and bloody, with what looked like rope burns around his wrists. "Looks like he's been in a hell of a fight," Charlie observed, his weathered face grim. "And tied up, by the looks of it." "Or tied something," Evelyn murmured, remembering how tightly Luke had been holding those babies. Maybe he tied himself to the saddle so he wouldn't fall. That would explain why he was riding so strange-like. Charlie shook his head in admiration. "That's some kind of determination right there, Mrs. Carter. Most men would have given up and made camp." "Most men don't ride through death carrying babies," Evelyn said softly, wringing out a rag and gently cleaning Luke's face. Bachiti Pem. Neath the dirt and blood, he looked younger than his 32 years, his features slack with exhaustion. Whatever happened, Charlie? He thought it was important enough to nearly kill himself getting here. As if in response to her words, Luke's eyes suddenly flew open. They were wild, unfocused, darting around the room like a cornered animal seeking escape. "The babies!" he gasped, trying to sit up. "Where are the—" "Easy, easy, Ta." Evelyn pressed a hand to his chest, gently pushing him back down. "They're right here, Luke. They're safe. Look!" She pointed to where the twins lay on the rug, still crying but no longer in distress. "You did it. You got them here safely." Luke's eyes followed her gesture, and when he saw the babies, his whole body seemed to deflate. He closed his eyes again, and Evelyn saw tears leak from the corners, tracking through the dirt on his face. "Saved them," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "Had to. Save them." "Or from what, Luke?" Evelyn asked gently. "What happened? Where did these babies come from?" But Luke was already sliding back into unconsciousness, his body's need for rest overriding everything else. His lips moved, forming words that Evelyn had to lean close to hear. "Dead Man's Crossing. All dead. Only them left. Couldn't leave them." Then he was gone again, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. Evelyn sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Dead Man's Crossing. She knew the place, a treacherous ford on the Platte River, about 30 miles northwest of here. It was a shortcut that wagon trains sometimes used, but it had earned its name honestly. The crossing was dangerous in good weather, deadly in bad, and the perfect place for an ambush. "Charlie," she said slowly, "how long would it take a man to ride from Dead Man's Crossing to here?" The old cowhand scratched his jaw, thinking. "In good conditions? Pushing hard? Maybe 4, 5 hours? But carrying babies? And looking like he's been through hell?" He shook his head. "I'd say more like 7, 8 hours. Maybe more." Evelyn looked at the sky through the window. The sun was just about gone now, the last light fading to purple at the horizon. If Luke had left Dead Man's Crossing early this morning— "He's been riding all day," she said softly, "in this heat, without stopping, carrying 2 babies." "It's a miracle he made it at all," Charlie agreed. "A lesser man would have died halfway here, or given up and left the babies somewhere." But Luke Heron hadn't given up. He'd ridden through exhaustion and pain, through heat and fear, clutching those babies like they were the most precious cargo in the world. And now he lay unconscious on her sofa, having given everything he had to deliver them safely. The twins' cries grew more insistent, dragging Evelyn's attention back to them. They needed food, and they needed it now. She'd nursed her own daughter once, but that had been 5 years ago, and her milk had long since dried up. She'd have to find another solution. "Charlie, do we still have that milk cow?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, ma'am, old Bessie. She's got a good calf this year." "Get me milk, fresh as you can, and find something I can use to feed these babies. A cloth, a clean piece of leather, anything they can suck on. And someone needs to ride to the Henderson place and see if Mrs. Henderson can spare some bottles or nursing supplies. She just had a baby herself last month." Charlie nodded and hurried off, leaving Evelyn alone with Luke and the twins. She gathered the babies up, one in each arm, and carried them to the kitchen. They were lighter than they should be, she noticed with concern. These children hadn't been fed properly in at least a day, maybe more. "Hush now, little ones," she murmured, rocking them gently as she waited for Charlie to return with the milk. "You're safe now. Whatever happened, whatever you've been through, you're safe." The twins looked up at her with dark, solemn eyes that seemed far too old for their tiny faces. They'd seen something, Evelyn realized. Babies that young didn't usually have that look, that haunted awareness of a world gone wrong. Whatever had happened at Dead Man's Crossing, these children had been there. They'd witnessed something terrible, and Luke had saved them from it. Charlie returned with milk still warm from the cow, and together they fashioned a makeshift feeding system using clean cloth strips soaked in milk. It wasn't ideal, but the twins latched on hungrily, sucking at the cloth with desperate enthusiasm. Evelyn fed them slowly, carefully, making sure they didn't choke in their eagerness to eat. As she fed them, she studied their faces. They were identical in every way. The same dark hair, the same brown eyes, the same small nose and delicate chin. Someone had loved these babies once, she thought. Someone had cared for them, cleaned them, dressed them in the little gowns they wore beneath the blood-stained shawl. Where was that someone now? Dead, most likely. Luke's words echoed in her mind. All dead? Only them left. By the time both babies had drunk their fill, Billy had returned from the Henderson place with proper nursing bottles and news that Mrs. Henderson would come by in the morning to help. The twins were growing drowsy now, their bellies full, their cries reduced to occasional whimpers. Evelyn carried them to her bedroom and laid them in the top drawer of her dresser, which she'd pulled out and lined with soft blankets. It was a trick her own mother had taught her. Dresser drawers made perfect cradles for small babies, better than leaving them on a bed where they might roll. The twins fit perfectly, side by side, their tiny hands instinctively finding each other as they drifted off to sleep. Evelyn stood over them for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart ached with a feeling she'd thought long dead. These weren't her babies. They belonged to someone else, someone who was likely lying dead in a shallow grave somewhere near Dead Man's Crossing. But looking at them now, watching them sleep with that particular peace that only babies know, she felt something shift inside her. A purpose. A reason to wake up tomorrow that had nothing to do with keeping the ranch running or honoring Thomas's memory. These babies needed her. And Luke, poor, exhausted Luke, had trusted her enough to bring them here rather than anywhere else. She returned to the sitting room to check on him. He was still sleeping deeply, his breathing more regular now. She'd covered him with a blanket, and in sleep, the hard lines of worry and pain had eased from his face. He looked younger, almost vulnerable, this man who'd ridden through hell with 2 babies in his arms. Evelyn pulled a chair close to the sofa and sat down, keeping watch. Outside, full night had fallen, and the prairie was alive with the sounds of darkness, coyotes calling to each other across the grasslands, nightbirds hunting in the sky, the endless whisper of wind through grass. This was her world, this harsh and beautiful country where life and death walked hand in hand, where men like Luke Heron did impossible things because someone had to, where babies could be orphaned in an instant and women like her could suddenly find themselves responsible for 2 lives they'd never planned for. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight, and still Evelyn sat, watching Luke sleep and listening to the distant sounds of the twins stirring in their makeshift cradle. Tomorrow would bring questions that needed answering. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out where these babies came from and what had happened to their family. Tomorrow she'd have to decide what came next. But tonight she simply sat vigil over the cowboy who'd been too tired to breathe properly, who'd clutched those babies like they were his own, who'd whispered saved them before collapsing into sleep. Because sometimes in this hard country, the only thing you could do was witness someone else's courage and be grateful you were there to see it. Around 2 a.m, Luke stirred. His eyes opened, clearer now, more focused. He looked around the room, taking in his surroundings, before his gaze settled on Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "The babies?" "Sleeping peacefully," Evelyn assured him, "fed and cleaned and safe in my bedroom. You did well, Luke. You saved them." He closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over his face. Then he tried to sit up, wincing as his bruised body protested. Evelyn rose quickly, helping him swing his legs to the floor. "Easy now. You've been through quite an ordeal. Charlie says you rode all day from Dead Man's Crossing." Luke nodded slowly. "Had to. Couldn't stop. They needed—" He trailed off, looking down at his torn hands. "They needed someone." "What happened out there, Luke?" For a long moment he was silent, his jaw working as if chewing over whether to speak. Finally, he looked up at her, and Evelyn saw something in his eyes that made her heart clench, a deep, bone-weary sorrow mixed with anger. "I was checking our northern fence line," he began, his voice low and rough. "Heard gunshots. Lots of them. By the time I got there," he swallowed hard. "Wagon was already burning. 3 men, 2 women, all dead. Shot where they stood. The men who did it were still there, going through the wagon, looking for valuables." "Dear God," Evelyn breathed. "I stayed hidden, watched them leave. Then I went to see if anyone had survived." His hands clenched into fists. Found the babies under the wagon floorboards. They'd been hidden there, wrapped up tight with a note pinned to their blanket. A note? Luke reached into his pocket, or tried to. His hands were shaking too badly. Evelyn gently took over, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out a piece of paper, folded many times and stained with dirt and blood. She unfolded it carefully, angling it toward the lamplight. The handwriting was hurried, desperate, but clear enough to read. Please. If someone finds them, their names are Grace and Faith Morrison. Born March 15, 1876. They are good babies. They deserve to live. Tell them their mama loved them. Tell them I'm sorry I couldn't protect them better. May God keep them safe. The note was signed with a shaking hand. Sarah Morrison. Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked at Luke, who was staring at the floor. She knew, he said quietly. That mother knew they were about to be attacked. She had just enough time to hide her babies and write that note. Then she died protecting them, trying to give them a chance. And you found them. I found them. Luke's voice was thick with emotion. They were so quiet, Mrs. Carter, like they knew they had to stay hidden. But when I opened that floorboard, they looked at me with those big eyes, and I couldn't leave them there. With their family dead all around them. I couldn't. So you brought them here. I didn't know where else to go. Ranch is 30 miles from there, and the nearest town is 45. You were closer, and I thought... He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. I thought if anyone would know what to do, it would be you. There was a weight to those words, a meaning that went deeper than simple practicality. Luke Heron had ridden 30 miles through heat and exhaustion, had pushed himself and his horse to the breaking point, had clutched 2 babies to his chest until his arms locked with cramps, and he'd done it all because he thought of her, because he trusted her. You thought right, Evelyn said softly, refolding the note with careful hands. We'll take care of them, Luke. Those babies will have a home here as long as they need one. What about the law? Don't we have to report what happened? Find their kin? In the morning, Evelyn said firmly. Tonight, everyone just needs to rest. You most of all. When did you last eat? Luke frowned, thinking. Yesterday morning, maybe. Come on then. Evelyn stood, holding out her hand. I'm going to feed you some beef stew and bread, and then you're going to sleep in a proper bed. Those babies are safe, Luke. You can rest now. He let her help him to his feet, swaying slightly from exhaustion. In the kitchen, she warmed up leftover stew and watched as he ate slowly, each bite seeming to take tremendous effort. He was running on nothing but willpower and determination, and now that the crisis was over, his body was finally demanding payment for what he'd put it through. When he'd finished eating, Evelyn led him to the small room off the kitchen that had been her husband's study. There was a daybed there, usually reserved for when Thomas had worked late into the night on the ranch accounts. She'd kept it made up, unable to change anything about the room in the months since his death. But tonight, it would serve a better purpose. Sleep here, she told Luke, pulling back the blanket. If the babies wake, I'll hear them. You've done enough. Luke sank onto the bed with a groan of relief, and Evelyn helped him pull off his boots. He was asleep before she'd even finished, his body simply shutting down the moment it felt safe to do so. Evelyn covered him with a quilt and stood for a moment, looking down at this man who'd ridden through death itself to save 2 children who weren't his own, who'd given everything he had because it was the right thing to do, because someone had to, because those babies deserved a chance at life. She thought about Thomas, about the kind of man he'd been. Good and steady and reliable, but never passionate. Never the type to risk everything on a wild ride through dangerous country for strangers. Thomas had been practical, sensible, the kind of man who thought before he acted. Luke Heron was different. Luke acted from the heart, from some deep well of conviction that made him do impossible things. And standing there in the lamplight, watching him sleep with that same exhausted peace she'd seen on the twins' faces, Evelyn realized something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. This man was dangerous. Not in the way outlaws were dangerous, but in the way that truly good men were dangerous. They made you believe in things you'd given up on. They made you hope when hope seemed foolish. They made you feel things you'd carefully locked away after too much loss and heartbreak. Evelyn turned away, returning to her own room where the twins slept peacefully in their dresser drawer cradle. She checked on them one more time, adjusting their blankets, marveling at how tiny they were, how fragile, and yet how miraculous. Grace and Faith Morrison, born into this hard world and nearly murdered before they could even know it, but alive now, sleeping soundly because a cowboy named Luke Heron had refused to let them die alone in the wilderness. Evelyn changed into her nightgown and climbed into her empty bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept returning to Luke's words. "I thought if anyone would know what to do, it would be you." Why her? Why bring the babies here instead of to the sheriff in town or to any of a dozen other ranches scattered across the prairie? They'd barely spoken 100 words to each other in all the months he'd worked here. She was the ranch owner's widow. He was the hired hand. They existed in different worlds, connected only by the daily business of running cattle and mending fences. Except that wasn't quite true, was it? Evelyn remembered the way Luke always tipped his hat to her when they passed in the yard, his eyes kind and respectful. The way he'd fixed her porch step without being asked after he'd noticed her stumble one morning. The way he'd stayed on after Thomas died, when most of the other hands had drifted off to find work elsewhere, uncertain about working for a woman. Luke had stayed. And when crisis came, when he held 2 babies in his arms and had to make an impossible choice, he'd ridden straight to her. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon, and one of the twins stirred in her sleep, making a small sound that was half cry, half sigh. Evelyn rose and went to the dresser drawer, looking down at the 2 tiny faces barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Grace and Faith," she whispered, trying out the names. They fit somehow. Grace for the mercy that had led Luke to find them. Faith for the belief that brought him here, to her door, trusting she would help. She thought about their mother, Sarah Morrison, writing that desperate note with death bearing down on her. What must she have felt, knowing she was about to die, hoping beyond hope that someone good would find her babies? The terror, the grief, the fierce maternal love that made her use her last moments not to plead for her own life, but to provide for theirs. Evelyn understood that kind of love. She'd felt it once for her own daughter, before fever had stolen that small life away. She'd thought she'd never feel it again, had resigned herself to a life of going through the motions, managing the ranch, existing, but not truly living. But looking at these babies now, feeling the way her heart opened despite every attempt to keep it closed, she knew she'd been wrong. Love wasn't something you could lock away or decide not to feel. It was something that happened to you, whether you wanted it or not, whether you were ready or not. These babies needed her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed them too. The thought terrified her, because needing meant hoping, and hoping meant risking the terrible pain of loss all over again. Evelyn had barely survived losing her daughter. She wasn't sure she could survive it twice. But as Grace stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp Faith's fingers, Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 5 long years. Tomorrow, she would contact the sheriff. Tomorrow, she would try to find out if Grace and Faith had any living relatives who might claim them. Tomorrow, she would deal with all the practical considerations of what came next. But tonight, in this quiet moment with moonlight painting everything silver, Evelyn let herself imagine a different future, one where these babies stayed, where their laughter filled this house again, where the empty rooms became nurseries and the silent halls echoed with the sound of small feet. And in that imagined future, she saw Luke, not as a hired hand, but as something more, something she didn't dare name yet but felt burning like a coal in her chest. She shook her head, trying to dismiss such foolish thoughts, but they persisted, stubborn as prairie grass, impossible to uproot once planted. In the study, Luke slept on, unaware that his single act of mercy had set in motion forces that would change all their lives. Unaware that by saving 2 babies, he'd also begun to save a broken-hearted widow who'd forgotten how to hope. The prairie wind sang through the eaves, carrying with it the promise of change, of new beginnings born from tragedy, of love found in the most unexpected places. And in a dresser drawer lined with blankets, 2 babies slept peacefully, alive because a cowboy had refused to let them die, and safe because a widow had forgotten how to turn away someone in need. The night wore on toward dawn, And in that space between darkness and light, something new was being born. A family that hadn't existed yesterday, forged not by blood, but by choice, by mercy, by the simple act of saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. Outside, the first birds began to sing, welcoming a new day none of them could have predicted and none of them would ever forget. The morning sun broke across the Nebraska prairie like a promise neither harsh nor gentle, just honest in its brightness. Evelyn woke to the sound she'd almost forgotten, the hungry cry of babies demanding to be fed. For one disoriented moment, she thought she was dreaming, that her daughter Mary was alive again and calling for her. Then memory crashed back and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Grace and Faith, the twins, Luke's desperate ride. It had all been real. She hurried to the dresser drawer and found both babies awake, their faces scrunched up and red with indignation at being hungry and wet and generally displeased with the world. Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. That was a good sign. Babies who could work up a proper temper were babies with fight in them, and these two would need all the fight they could muster. All right, she murmured, lifting Grace first and then Faith, cradling one in each arm. Let's get you sorted out, shall we? The next hour passed in a blur of changed diapers, made from torn flour sacks, since she had nothing else on hand, and careful feeding with the bottles Mrs. Henderson had sent. The twins ate greedily, their small hands grasping at the bottles, their eyes fixed on Evelyn's face with an intensity that made her chest ache. They were beautiful babies, she realized, not just in the way all babies are beautiful, but truly lovely, with perfect features and that luminous skin that seemed to glow from within. Someone had loved these children deeply, had cared for them well in their brief months of life. The tragedy of their loss hit Evelyn anew as she burped them gently, one on each shoulder. Your mama loved you, she whispered to them, remembering Sarah Morrison's desperate note. She loved you so much, she gave her life trying to keep you safe. Don't ever forget that. A sound from the hallway made her turn. Luke stood in the doorway, looking better than he had last night, but still worn around the edges. He'd washed his face and hands, but he wore the same torn, blood-stained clothes, and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion that one night's sleep couldn't cure. Morning, ma'am, he said quietly. I heard them crying and thought maybe you needed help. I've got them for now, Evelyn replied. But you can help by eating some breakfast. There's coffee on the stove and biscuits in the warmer. Help yourself. Luke hesitated, as if unsure whether it was proper for a hired hand to eat in the main house kitchen. But hunger and exhaustion won out over propriety, and he nodded gratefully before disappearing toward the kitchen. When the babies were fed and settled, Evelyn laid them back in their makeshift cradle and went to join Luke. She found him at the kitchen table, eating slowly but steadily, his movements careful as if his body still hurt, which it probably did, given the bruises she'd seen last night. How are you feeling? She asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee and sitting across from him. Been better, Luke admitted. Been worse, too. I'll live. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of your health. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. No, ma'am, I suppose it's not. But it's the truth. I'm sore and tired, but nothing's broken that time won't fix. Evelyn studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. In daylight, she could see details she'd missed last night, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from squinting into too many suns, the surprising gentleness in hands that looked like they could break a man in half. Tell me more about what happened, she said. If you can. If it's not too hard to talk about. Luke set down his biscuit and stared at his plate for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but Evelyn could hear the anger underneath, carefully banked like coals waiting for wind. Like I said, I was riding fence line. It was early, maybe 7 in the morning. I heard shots, rifle fire, a lot of it, all at once. Then screaming, but it cut off quick. He paused, his jaw tightening. I rode toward the sound, but careful-like. Didn't know what I was riding into. Smart, Evelyn said softly. Got to the top of a rise overlooking Dead Man's Crossing and saw the whole thing laid out below. Wagon was stopped at the river's edge, and there were 4 men on horses circling it. The people from the wagon were already down, already dead. I could see bodies lying in the grass. Evelyn's hand tightened on her coffee cup. Did you recognize the men who did it? Luke shook his head. Never seen them before. They weren't local, that's for sure. Had the look of drifters, maybe Confederate deserters, or just plain outlaws. Hard men, the kind who'd kill for $1 or for nothing at all. He took a sip of coffee, his hand steady despite the horror he was describing. I watched them rifle through the wagon, taking whatever wasn't nailed down. Heard them laughing about it, about the killing. Dear God. One of them wanted to burn the wagon right then, but another said to wait, said there might be more valuables they hadn't found yet. So they spent near an hour going through everything, tossing goods out into the grass, arguing over who got what. Luke's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the way people spoke about terrible things when feeling them too deeply would break something inside. I had my rifle, could have taken one of them maybe, but there were 4 and I was alone. If I'd tried, I would have gotten killed and wouldn't have been any use to anyone. You did the right thing, Evelyn said firmly. 4 to 1, those are suicide odds. Felt like a coward, though, sitting up on that hill watching them desecrate those people's belongings, their bodies lying right there in the sun. He looked up at Evelyn, and she saw the guilt burning in his eyes. Should have done something. You did do something. You saved those babies. That's more than most men would have managed. Luke nodded slowly, accepting her words even if he didn't quite believe them. Eventually they rode off, heading west. I waited another half hour to make sure they were really gone. Then I went down to see if anyone had survived. He stopped, and Evelyn watched him gather himself, saw the moment when he had to force himself to continue. 3 men, 2 women, like I said. All shot clean through, quick kills. They were settlers by the looks of it. Wagon was full of furniture, farming tools, seed bags. One of the men had a watch that said, "To Jacob," on our wedding day. Another had letters in his pocket addressed to someone in Kansas. They were heading west, probably looking for cheap land to homestead. A family, Evelyn said softly. 2 families, I think. Maybe brothers and their wives or cousins. Can't say for sure. Luke rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of weariness that went bone deep. I checked all the bodies, made sure there was nothing I could do. Then I heard it, just the tiniest sound like a kitten mewing. Took me a minute to figure out where it was coming from. Despite knowing how the story ended, Evelyn found herself leaning forward. The wagon floorboards. Yeah, there was a hidden compartment, real clever-like, under the driver's seat. Someone had pried it open just enough to shove something inside, then pushed it closed again. I got my knife out and worked it open, and there they were. Luke's voice softened, and something like wonder crept into his tone. 2 little babies, wrapped up tight, with that note pinned to their blanket. They looked at me with those big eyes, not crying anymore, just watching, like they were waiting to see if I was safe or not. They knew, Evelyn said. Even that young, babies know when something's wrong. I picked them up, both of them together, and they just settled, like they'd decided I was all right. And I thought, these babies, they just lost everything. Everyone who loved them, everyone who was supposed to protect them, all gone. And if I didn't do something, they'd die too, out there in the sun, hidden in a wagon nobody would find for days. So you brought them here. Didn't have much choice. Like I said, town was farther, and these babies needed feeding sooner than later. Plus, he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Plus what? Luke met her eyes, and Evelyn saw something there that made her breath catch. Plus, I trust you, Mrs. Carter. Don't know you well, but I know enough. Know you're fair and kind, and you don't turn away from hard things. Figured if anyone would help these babies, it'd be you. The simple honesty of his words struck Evelyn harder than any flowery speech could have. This man barely knew her, yet he trusted her with the most precious cargo he could carry. That trust felt like a gift and a burden all at once. Thank you, she said quietly, for trusting me and for saving them. Had to be done. Luke shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with praise. Any decent man would have done the same. I'm not so sure about that, Evelyn said. Plenty of men would have ridden on, told themselves it wasn't their problem, or would have taken the babies to the nearest town and handed them off to whoever would take them, then forgotten about it. But you rode 30 miles through heat and exhaustion to bring them somewhere safe. That's not just decency, Luke. That's courage. A faint flush crept up Luke's neck, and he looked away, embarrassed. Before he could respond, Charlie knocked on the kitchen door and stuck his head in. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Carter, but there's a rider coming up the road. Looks like Sheriff Morrison from town. Evelyn and Luke exchanged glances. Morrison, the same last name as the babies. Show him in when he gets here, Charlie, Evelyn said, rising. Luke, maybe you should stay. The sheriff will want to hear what you saw. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Tom Morrison sat in Evelyn's parlor, his hat in his hands and his weathered face grave. He was a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and the kind of solid, dependable presence that made people trust him. But today his eyes were red-rimmed and his hands shook slightly as he held his coffee cup. Mrs. Carter, he said, his voice rough, thank you for receiving me. I know it's early, but I got word last night that there was trouble out at Dead Man's Crossing. A rancher found bodies this morning, sent his boy to fetch me. I've been riding since before dawn. The people from the wagon, Evelyn said softly. We know. Luke here. She gestured to where Luke stood near the fireplace. He found them yesterday. The sheriff's eyes sharpened. You were there? Heard the shots, Luke said. Got there after it was done. 4 men, outlaws by the looks of them, killed everyone and robbed the wagon. Did you see their faces? Would you recognize them? I would, Luke said grimly. I'd know them anywhere. Sheriff Morrison nodded slowly, filing that information away. Then he seemed to brace himself, his whole body going rigid. Mrs. Carter, I have to ask, were there any survivors? The rancher who found the scene said there were 5 bodies, but he thought there should have been more. There was a cradle in the wagon, baby things. Evelyn's heart clenched as she understood. The baby's name is Morrison. Your relation? The sheriff's face crumpled just for a moment before he pulled himself together with visible effort. My nephew Jacob, he and his wife Sarah, they were traveling with Sarah's brother and his wife, heading to Kansas to start fresh. Sarah had twins 4 months ago, 2 little girls. Grace and Faith. His voice broke on the names. Are they? They're alive, Evelyn said quickly, and watched as relief so powerful it was almost painful washed over the sheriff's face. Luke found them hidden in the wagon and brought them here. They're sleeping in my bedroom right now, safe and sound. Sheriff Morrison stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his coffee. Can I see them? Please, I need to see them. Evelyn led him to her bedroom, where the twins were sleeping peacefully in their dresser-drawer cradle. The sheriff knelt beside them, his big hands hovering over their small bodies, as if afraid to touch them, as if they might disappear if he did. Grace, he whispered, gently touching one baby's hand. Faith. He touched the other, and tears began to roll down his weathered cheeks. Oh, Sarah, you brave girl! You saved them! He stayed like that for a long moment, just looking at the babies, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Evelyn stood in the doorway, giving him privacy for his grief. Behind her, she could sense Luke's presence, solid and quiet. Finally, Sheriff Morrison stood, wiping his eyes roughly. I'm sorry, ma'am, that was unseemly. Nothing unseemly about grief, Evelyn said gently. Those babies are your family. You're allowed to feel. They're my only family left now, the sheriff said, his voice raw. I'm a bachelor, never married. Jacob was my sister's boy, the closest thing to a son I'll ever have. And now he's gone. They're all gone. He looked at the sleeping babies. Except for these 2. These precious little girls. They returned to the parlor, and Evelyn poured the sheriff more coffee while he gathered himself. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier, back in professional mode. I need to know everything you saw, Mr. Heron. Every detail. Those men need to be caught and hanged. Luke told the story again, this time with more detail. The color of the horses, the approximate ages of the men, the direction they'd headed. Sheriff Morrison took notes in a small leather book, his face growing grimmer with each detail. I'll wire the U.S. Marshal's office, he said when Luke finished. Get some deputies together and see if we can pick up their trail. It's been near 24 hours, but maybe we'll get lucky. I'll ride with you, Luke said immediately. I can identify them. No, Evelyn said, surprising herself with her vehemence. Both men looked at her. I'm sorry, Sheriff, but Luke nearly killed himself getting those babies here safely. He needs rest, and besides... She hesitated, then pressed on. Besides, those babies need him. He's the one who saved them. They should know that when they're older. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Sheriff Morrison nodded slowly. Mrs. Carter's right. You've done your part, son, and done it well. Rest up, and if we need you to identify anyone we catch, we'll send word. For now, the best thing you can do for Grace and Faith is stay alive and well. After the sheriff left, promising to return later to check on the twins, Evelyn and Luke stood in the parlor in awkward silence. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. She could hear Charlie calling orders to the hands, the lowing of cattle, the normal sounds of a working day beginning. But inside, everything had changed. I should get back to work, Luke said finally. Fences won't mend themselves. Luke Heron, you'll do no such thing, Evelyn said firmly. You're in no condition to work. You can barely stand up straight. I'm fine, ma'am. You're not fine. You're exhausted and injured and probably running on sheer stubbornness at this point. She crossed her arms. Consider it an order from your employer. No work for you today or tomorrow. Rest. Heal. The fences will still be there when you're better. Luke opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Yes, ma'am. Good. Now, I'm going to check on the babies again. You should sleep more if you can, or at least sit down before you fall down. But Luke didn't sit. Instead, he followed her to the bedroom, drawn by some invisible thread to the babies he'd saved. They stood together by the dresser drawer, looking down at Grace and Faith sleeping peacefully, unaware of the tragedy that had orphaned them or the lengths one man had gone to keep them alive. What'll happen to them? Luke asked quietly. Sheriff Morrison, he's a good man, but he's got no wife, no way to care for babies. I don't know, Evelyn admitted. I suppose you'll have to find someone, or maybe send them to family back east, if there is any. They've been through enough, Luke said, his voice tight with emotion. Moving them again, sending them away to strangers. I know, Evelyn said softly. She looked at the babies, at their perfect little faces, and felt that dangerous warmth spreading in her chest again. I know. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely fulfilling. Evelyn cared for the twins with a dedication that surprised her, rising multiple times each night to feed them, changing endless diapers, rocking them when they cried. Mrs. Henderson came by daily to help and to offer advice, and soon other ranch wives from neighboring properties began stopping in with baby clothes and supplies. Heard about what happened, Mrs. Taylor said, arriving with a basket full of tiny gowns. Terrible thing, just terrible. But those babies are blessed to have you caring for them. Luke stayed around the house more than usual, even after his strength returned. He'd do his morning work with the cattle and fences, then find excuses to come back to the main house, checking if anything needed fixing, bringing in firewood, asking if Evelyn needed anything from town. But really, they both knew he was coming to see the babies. Evelyn would find him sometimes, sitting in the kitchen with one twin cradled in his big, scarred hands, talking to her softly about horses or weather or nothing at all. The babies seemed to recognize him, their eyes following him when he moved, their cries settling when he picked them up. You're good with them, Evelyn observed one afternoon, watching as Luke expertly burped Grace. Had younger siblings growing up, Luke said, patting the baby's back gently. Helped raise most of them after Ma died. This is familiar territory. Where are your siblings now? Scattered. Some went west, some went east. Lost track of most of them over the years. There was an old sadness in his voice. That's how it goes, I suppose. Family drifts apart like dandelion seeds in the wind. Not always, Evelyn said softly. Sometimes family is what you make it, not just what you're born into. Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. An understanding, a possibility, a question neither was quite ready to ask out loud. The moment was broken by Faith beginning to fuss in her cradle. Evelyn went to pick her up, and soon they were both occupied with the endless needs of infants. But the feeling lingered, hanging in the air like summer heat, impossible to ignore. That evening, after the babies were asleep and Luke had returned to the bunkhouse, Evelyn sat on her porch and watched the sun set over the prairie. Sheriff Morrison had stopped by earlier with bad news. The outlaws' trail had gone cold. They disappeared into the wilderness like ghosts, and without more to go on, the search was being suspended. I'm sorry, he'd said, his face haggard. Those men will answer for what they did. If not in this life, then in the next. But justice for my nephew and his family, I'm afraid it'll have to wait. Now, sitting alone in the gathering dusk, Evelyn thought about justice and mercy, about revenge and forgiveness. Those men had stolen 5 lives and orphaned 2 babies, and they were out there somewhere, unpunished and free. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But then she thought about Grace and Faith, sleeping peacefully inside. They were alive because of mercy, because Luke had chosen to save rather than avenge. If he'd tried to take on those 4 outlaws, he would have died, and the babies would have died too, undiscovered in their hiding place. Sometimes, Evelyn realized, the best revenge was not revenge at all. It was choosing life over death, hope over despair. It was looking at 2 orphaned babies and saying, "You will not be another casualty. You will live." The screen door creaked and she turned to find Luke standing there. "Saw your lamp still on," he said. "Thought maybe something was wrong." "Just thinking," Evelyn said. "Couldn't sleep. Mind if I join you?" "Please." Luke sat in the other porch chair, the one that had been Thomas's, and for a moment they were both silent, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. It should have felt awkward, this quiet companionship, but somehow it didn't. It felt natural, right? As if they'd been sitting together like this for years instead of days. "Sheriff Morrison came by earlier," Evelyn said finally. "They lost the trail." "I heard," Luke said quietly. "Charlie told me." "Does it bother you that they got away?" Luke was quiet for a long time, thinking. "Yeah," he admitted. "It bothers me. Those men killed 5 people in cold blood, left 2 babies to die. They should hang for that." He paused. "But I've been thinking about something the sheriff said when he first came here. He asked if the babies were alive, and when you said yes, the look on his face, it was like someone had given him the world." He was so relieved, Evelyn remembered. "That's what matters in the end," Luke said. "Not that the bad men got away, but that the babies lived. That something good came out of all that evil. Justice would be nice, but mercy—" He looked at Evelyn. "Mercy is better." They sat in comfortable silence after that, until the moon rose full and bright over the grasslands. Inside, one of the babies began to cry, and Evelyn rose to attend to her. Luke rose too, following her inside without being asked, and together they cared for Grace and Faith in the lamplit kitchen, passing bottles and clean diapers between them with the easy coordination of long practice. This, Evelyn thought, as she watched Luke gently rock Faith while she fed Grace, this is what family looks like. Not always blood relations, not always planned or expected, but people who show up and stay and care, who choose each other day after day. "Luke," she said suddenly, the words coming before she could think better of them. "What if they didn't have to leave?" He looked up from Faith, his eyes questioning. "The babies," Evelyn clarified, though her heart was pounding. What if they stayed here? With me? With us?" Sheriff Morrison is a bachelor with no idea how to raise twin girls. He knows it, I know it. He's grateful they're alive, but he's already overwhelmed just thinking about taking care of them. Evelyn set down Grace's bottle, her hands trembling slightly. "But I could do it. I have this big house, plenty of room. The ranch is doing well enough to support them. And her voice caught. "I want them, Luke. I know it's only been a few days, but I can't imagine this house without them now." Luke's face had gone very still, very serious. "That's a big commitment, Mrs. Carter. Those babies, they'll need everything. Years of care, love, teaching. It's not like raising cattle." "I know that," Evelyn said, perhaps more sharply than she intended. "I raised a daughter before. I know what it takes." The pain of that loss flashed across her face before she could hide it. Luke's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest you didn't." "No, I'm sorry," Evelyn said, sitting down heavily. I can't send them away, Luke. I can't. They need me. And maybe—" She looked up at him, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. "Maybe I need them too." "Then keep them," Luke said simply. "Talk to the sheriff. See if he'd agree to let you adopt them. I can't imagine he'd say no. He knows you'd give them a good home. But what about you? The words came out before Evelyn could stop them, and she felt heat rush to her face. I mean, you saved them. You brought them here. Don't you have a say in what happens to them? Luke was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Faith sleeping in his arms. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I'd like to think I'd have a say, ma'am. I'd like to think that maybe I could stay and help, if you wanted, if you needed. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Evelyn felt that pull again, stronger now. This man who'd ridden through hell with babies in his arms, who cared for them as gently as if they were his own, who looked at her like she was something precious and breakable and strong all at once. I think I'd like that, she said softly. I think I'd like that very much. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Inside, two babies slept peacefully, unaware that their future was being decided by two people who barely knew each other but were beginning to understand that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in crisis, tested by hardship, and sealed by the simple decision to stay. The next morning brought a spring storm that had been building on the horizon for days, rolling in with dark clouds that turned the prairie sky the color of bruises. Evelyn woke to the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance and the twins fussing in their drawer, unsettled by the atmospheric pressure change that even babies could feel in their bones. She fed them quickly, changed them, and settled them back down just as the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows. By mid-morning, the storm had arrived in earnest, sheets of rain driving sideways across the grasslands, wind howling around the corners of the house like something alive and angry. Luke appeared at the kitchen door around noon, soaked through despite his oilskin coat, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto Evelyn's clean floor. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, pulling off the hat. "Cattle are getting spooked by the lightning. Charlie sent me to check if you need anything battened down around the house before it gets worse." "The shutters on the east side are loose," Evelyn said, handing him a towel, "and there's a leak starting in the back bedroom. But Luke, you're drenched. Stay inside until this passes." "Can't, ma'am. Cattle won't wait on weather." But he took the towel gratefully, wiping his face. "I'll fix those shutters first, though, before I head back out." Evelyn watched him work from the kitchen window, his figure barely visible through the curtains of rain as he wrestled the shutters closed and latched them secure. He moved with purpose despite the storm, despite his exhaustion from the previous days. This was a man who did what needed doing, no matter the cost to himself. When he came back inside, she had coffee waiting and a plate of cold chicken and bread. "Eat," she commanded. "You can't work on an empty stomach." Luke didn't argue this time, just sat at her kitchen table and ate, while rain drummed on the roof and thunder shook the windows in their frames. The twins were awake in their cradle, watching the ceiling with wide eyes, as if they could see the storm through the wooden boards above them. "They seem calm," Luke observed, glancing toward the bedroom where the babies lay. "Most babies would be screaming their heads off in weather like this." "They've been through worse than a storm," Evelyn said quietly. "Maybe they know the difference between noise that can hurt them and noise that's just noise." "That's a hard lesson for such little ones to learn." Luke set down his coffee cup, his expression distant. "No child should have to learn that so young." Evelyn studied him across the table, this man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders despite having no obligation to do so. "Luke, can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you really bring them here? To me, specifically?" She leaned forward slightly. "You said you trust me, but we barely know each other. You could have taken them to any number of places closer than here." Luke was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. The storm raged outside, giving them a strange sense of isolation, as if they were the only people left in the world. "You ever watch someone when they don't know you're watching?" he asked finally. "See how they really are, when they're not performing for anybody?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "I've been working this ranch for near on 8 months now. In that time, I've seen you deal with dishonest suppliers, stubborn cattle, hands who tried to take advantage because you're a woman alone. I've seen you be fair when you could have been harsh, kind when you had every right to be cold." He looked up at her, and his eyes were honest and clear. "I've seen you leave food on the bunkhouse steps when the hands were short on supplies, even though they should have budgeted better. I've seen you sit up all night with a sick horse that wasn't worth saving just because you couldn't stand to see it suffer. I've seen you put flowers on your husband's grave every Sunday, rain or shine, and talk to him like he's still listening. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed and touched that he'd noticed all these small things she thought no one saw. So when I was sitting on that horse with 2 babies in my arms, trying to figure out where to go, your face was the one that came to mind, Luke continued, because I knew in my bones that you wouldn't turn them away, that you'd see them as what they are, 2 innocent lives worth saving, not just a burden or a problem to be solved. He paused. And I was right, wasn't I? You were right, Evelyn whispered, her throat tight with emotion. I couldn't turn them away if I tried. Neither could I. Luke's voice was rough. Soon as I saw them looking up at me from that hiding spot, I was done for. They got under my skin somehow, those 2 little girls. Made me think about things I'd given up thinking about a long time ago. What things? He looked away, out the rain-streaked window. Family, home, a reason to stay in one place instead of drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm 32 years old, Mrs. Carter. Most men my age have wives and children, a piece of land they can call their own. I've got nothing but the clothes on my back and a horse that's getting too old for hard riding. That's not nothing, Evelyn said firmly. You have your honor, your courage, your good heart. Those things matter more than land or money. Try paying for a future with honor, Luke said bitterly. Try building a life on good intentions. Before Evelyn could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by a splintering crash from outside. Both of them jumped up, and Luke rushed to the window. Lightning hit the old oak by the barn, he said, his voice tight with alarm. Tree split right down the middle, and half of it fell on the barn roof. I can see flames. The horses, Evelyn gasped. They kept 4 horses in that barn, including Dusty, the gelding that had carried Luke and the babies to safety. Luke was already moving, grabbing his hat and coat. Stay here with the babies. I'll get the horses out. I'm coming with you, Evelyn said, reaching for her own coat. You can't manage 4 panicked horses alone in this storm. Mrs. Carter, those are my horses in my barn, and I'm coming. Her tone left no room for argument. The babies will be fine for a few minutes. They're safe inside. They ran out into the storm together, the wind nearly knocking Evelyn off her feet. Rain lashed at them horizontally, cold and sharp as needles. Through the sheets of water, she could see orange flames licking up from the barn roof where the tree had punched through, the fire somehow persisting despite the downpour. The barn doors were already open, and Charlie was inside trying to calm the horses, who were screaming and kicking at their stalls in terror. Smoke was beginning to fill the space, thick and acrid. Get them out, Luke shouted over the roar of wind and fire. Don't try to lead them. Just open the stalls and let them run. They'll head for the paddock on their own. Together, the 3 of them worked to release the panicked animals. The first 2 horses bolted as soon as their stall doors opened, racing out into the storm. The third, a young mare named Daisy, was too frightened to move, pressing herself into the back corner of her stall and rolling her eyes white with fear. I've got her, Luke said, ducking into the stall. Evelyn watched as he approached the terrified horse slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice that somehow carried over the chaos. Easy, girl, easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you. Just need you to walk with me, that's all. Just walk. The mare's ears twitched toward his voice, and slowly, incredibly, she began to calm. Luke reached her side and ran his hand down her neck, still talking in that soothing tone. Then he was leading her out, one careful step at a time, through smoke and flame and storm. But the 4th horse, Dusty, was trapped. Part of the fallen tree had crashed through the roof directly above his stall, blocking the door with burning branches. The old gelding was kicking at the walls, trying to break free, his screams cutting through Evelyn's heart like knives. We can't reach him, Charlie shouted, coughing in the smoke. The whole roof is going to come down any second. We need to get out. No, Luke said flatly. He was already grabbing an axe from the wall. I'm not leaving him. That horse carried me and those babies 30 miles. I'm not letting him burn. Luke, it's too dangerous, Evelyn started, but he was already moving toward Dusty's stall, swinging the axe at the burning branches that blocked the door. "Get outside," he ordered, not looking back. "Both of you. Now!" Charlie grabbed Evelyn's arm, trying to pull her toward the door, but she wrenched free. "I'm not leaving him," she said, echoing Luke's words. If he was going to be foolish enough to risk his life, she was going to be there to pull him out if things went wrong. Luke chopped through the branches with desperate speed, flames singing his hands and arms, smoke choking his lungs. Above them, the roof groaned ominously, and Evelyn could see more of the structure beginning to sag. "Luke, hurry!" she screamed. With one final swing, the last branch fell away, and Luke threw open the stall door. Dusty reared up, nearly striking him, but Luke dodged and grabbed the horse's halter. "Come on, old friend," he gasped. "Time to go." The gelding seemed to understand. He followed Luke toward the barn entrance, moving as fast as his old legs could carry him. Evelyn ran ahead of them, clearing the path, and they burst out into the rain just as a section of the barn roof collapsed behind them with a tremendous roar. They kept running until they reached the paddock fence, where the other horses had gathered, still agitated, but safe. Luke released Dusty, who trotted off to join his companions, and then he simply collapsed onto the muddy ground, coughing violently. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him. "Are you hurt?" "Luke, look at me." "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he wheezed, but his hands were burned and his face was streaked with soot and tears. Whether from smoke or emotion, she couldn't tell. "Is everyone out? Charlie, the other hands?" "We're all out," Charlie confirmed, appearing through the rain. He was limping slightly, but otherwise unharmed. Billy and the other boys were in the bunkhouse when it happened. Everyone's accounted for. They sat in the mud and rain, watching the barn burn. The storm was helping to contain the fire, keeping it from spreading to other buildings, but there was no saving the structure itself. By the time the rain finally began to ease, the barn was nothing but blackened timber and smoking ruins. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," Charlie said quietly. "That was a good barn. Your husband built it himself the first year you came here." Evelyn looked at the destruction, at yet another piece of Thomas being taken from her, and felt a strange sort of calm. "It's just wood and nails," she said. "We can build another barn. We can't replace people or horses. Everyone who matters is safe." She helped Luke to his feet, supporting him as they walked back to the house. He was shaking now. Whether from cold or shock or delayed fear, she couldn't tell. Inside, she sat him down at the kitchen table and began tending to his burned hands, spreading salve over the blistered skin with gentle fingers. "You could have died in there," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. "That roof could have come down on your head." "But it didn't," Luke said. "And Dusty's alive." "He's just a horse, Luke. He's not worth your life." "He's not just a horse." Luke's voice was fierce despite his exhaustion. "He carried those babies to safety. He earned his life today, same as they did. I wasn't going to let him die for lack of trying." Evelyn finished bandaging his hands and sat back, looking at him. This man who would risk everything for two babies he didn't know, for a horse that had done its duty. This man who seemed incapable of walking away from someone in need, no matter what it cost him. "You're going to get yourself killed one of these days," she said softly, "running into burning buildings, fighting lost causes." "Maybe," Luke agreed, "but I'll die knowing I tried. That's more than most people can say." The twins began crying then, disturbed by all the commotion, and Evelyn went to tend to them. She found both babies red-faced and wailing, their small fists waving in indignation at being ignored for so long. As she picked up Grace, she caught sight of herself in the mirror over her dresser, hair wild and wet, face streaked with soot, dress torn and muddy. She looked like she'd been through a war, and in a way, she supposed she had. Luke appeared in the doorway, watching as she cradled the babies. "Need help?" he asked. "Always," Evelyn said with a tired smile. "Can you hold Faith while I feed Grace?" They settled into the familiar routine, passing babies and bottles between them, and slowly the chaos of the day began to recede. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean-washed world where everything smelled of rain and smoke and new beginnings. "Mrs. Carter," Luke said after a while, his voice hesitant. "Earlier you said something about the babies staying, about adopting them. Did you mean that?" "I meant it," Evelyn said firmly. I'm going to talk to Sheriff Morrison tomorrow, see what needs to be done legally. Those babies belong here, Luke. This is their home now. And what about me? The question came out so quietly she almost missed it. Do I belong here too? Evelyn looked at him over Grace's small head, this man who'd saved her horses and held her babies and made her feel things she'd thought dead and buried with Thomas. I think you do, she said carefully. If that's what you want. If you want to stay and help raise them, help rebuild the barn, help run this ranch, I'd welcome it. As what? Luke pressed. As a hired hand? As help with the babies? What exactly are you offering, Mrs. Carter? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest as she searched for the right words. I'm offering a partnership, she said finally. Someone to help me make decisions about this place, about those babies. Someone I can trust. Someone who... She trailed off, losing courage. Someone who what? Luke's eyes were intent on her face. Someone who stays, Evelyn whispered. Not because they're paid to, but because they want to. Because this place matters to them. Because the people here matter. The people, Luke repeated, meaning the babies. Meaning all of us, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but clear. The babies. The ranch. Me. The words fell into silence. Faith had finished her bottle and was drowsing in Luke's arms, her tiny hand wrapped around his thumb. Grace was already asleep against Evelyn's shoulder. In the quiet kitchen, with the late afternoon sun breaking through the storm clouds and painting everything gold, they looked like a family, not the family either of them had planned or expected, but a family nonetheless. I want to stay, Luke said finally. Not just for the babies, though God knows they've gotten under my skin, but for you too, Mrs. Carter. For Evelyn. He said her name carefully, as if testing its weight on his tongue. If that's not too forward. It's not too forward, Evelyn said, though her cheeks burned. It's honest. And I appreciate honesty. Then I'll be honest, Luke said, shifting Faith in his arms so he could look at Evelyn directly. I think about you more than is probably proper for a hired hand to think about his employer. I think about you in the morning when I'm out with the cattle, wondering if you're managing all right with the babies. I think about you at night when I'm trying to sleep, wondering if you need help or if you're sitting alone in that big house wishing things were different. He paused. And I think about what it would be like to have a real home, with you and those babies, instead of just a job that'll end when the season changes or the money runs out. Evelyn couldn't breathe. She'd suspected he felt something, had seen it in the way he looked at her, the way he always found excuses to stay near the house. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him lay his heart bare like this, was overwhelming. Luke? She began, not sure what she was going to say, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, he said. I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other in the way people usually know each other before they start thinking about futures together. But these past few days, taking care of those babies with you, working beside you, seeing how strong and kind and good you are, it's shown me more about you than a year of polite conversation could have. And I like what I see. More than like, if I'm being completely honest. What are you saying? Evelyn whispered, though she thought she knew, though her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. I'm saying I want to stay, not as hired help, but as... He struggled for words. As someone who has a stake in this place, in those babies' futures, in your future, if you'll have me. That sounds an awful lot like you're proposing something, Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. Maybe I am, Luke said. Maybe I'm saying that those babies need a father as much as a mother, that this ranch needs someone to help run it properly, that you need someone who'll stand beside you, not behind you, and maybe, just maybe, I'm saying that I could be that person, if you'd let me. Evelyn looked down at Grace sleeping in her arms, then across at Faith cradled against Luke's chest, then finally at Luke himself, this good, brave, impossible man who'd ridden into her life carrying 2 babies and somehow made her believe in second chances. It's too fast, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Luke challenged gently. We've been through more in the past week than most couples go through in a year. Fire and death and birth and fear and hope. If that doesn't show you who a person really is, what does? People will talk, Evelyn said. A widow remarrying so quickly, to a hired hand, no less. Let them talk, Luke said firmly. Their opinions don't keep those babies fed. Their opinions don't rebuild that barn or keep this ranch running. Their opinions don't matter one damn bit compared to what's real and what's right. And what's right? Evelyn asked. How do we know this is right and not just two lonely people grabbing at something because it's there? Luke was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, I can't speak for you. But for me, this isn't about loneliness. This is about recognition, like seeing something you didn't know you'd been looking for your whole life, and suddenly understanding that everything before was just waiting. Waiting for this moment, this person, this choice. He looked at her steadily. Does that sound like I'm just grabbing at something convenient? No, Evelyn admitted. It sounds like you've been thinking about this a lot. I have been, Luke said. All through last night, lying awake in that little room, hearing the babies cry and hearing you get up to tend them. All through today, working in the rain and fighting that fire and thinking, I might not make it out to tell you any of this. I've been thinking about what matters and what doesn't, what's worth fighting for and what's worth letting go. He paused. And I've decided you're worth fighting for. Those babies are worth fighting for. This, whatever this is between us, is worth fighting for. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back angrily. She'd cried enough over the past few years, mourning Thomas, mourning her daughter, mourning the life she'd thought she'd have. She didn't want to cry anymore, not even happy tears. And she blinked them back angrily. She'd cried enough over the past few years, mourning Thomas, mourning her daughter, mourning the life she'd thought she'd have. She didn't want to cry anymore, not even happy tears. But they came anyway, sliding down her cheeks as she looked at this man who'd somehow seen past all her walls and defenses to the lonely, frightened woman beneath. This man who wasn't asking her to be anything other than herself, strong and capable and in need of help all at once. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared to hope for this. Every time I've loved something, it's been taken away. My daughter, my husband. What if I let myself love you and those babies and then you'll have loved, Luke interrupted gently. You'll have been brave enough to try again. That's all anyone can do, Evelyn. Try and hope and take the risk. But what if it's not enough? What if it is, he countered. What if we take this chance and it works? What if those babies grow up happy and healthy with two parents who love them? What if you and I build something real here, something that lasts? You make it sound so simple, Evelyn said through her tears. It is simple, Luke said. Not easy, but simple. Do you want this? Do you want me to stay, to help raise these babies, to be your partner in all of it? Yes or no? Evelyn looked at Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, then at Faith nestled against Luke, then out the window at the smoking ruins of the barn that would need rebuilding, at the prairie stretching endlessly under the clearing sky. She thought about Thomas and how much she'd loved him, and how his love had been gentle and safe and ultimately not enough to fill all the empty spaces in her heart. Then she thought about Luke, who was neither gentle nor safe, who challenged her and scared her and made her feel more alive than she'd felt in years. Yes, she heard herself say, the word coming out stronger than she'd expected. Yes, I want this. I want you to stay. Not just for the babies, but for me. For us. Luke's face transformed, a smile breaking across it like sunrise. You mean it? I mean it, Evelyn said, and suddenly she was smiling too, crying and smiling at the same time. But Luke, we have to do this right, for the baby's sake, for the ranch's sake. People need to see that this is legitimate, that we're not just... We'll do it right, Luke promised. We'll talk to Sheriff Morrison, get the adoption paperwork started. We'll court properly, let people see that this is real. And when enough time has passed that even the biggest gossip in town can't find fault, we'll make it official. Make what official? Evelyn asked, needing to hear him say it. We'll get married, Luke said simply. Properly married, in a church with witnesses and vows before God. Those babies will have two parents, legal and true. This ranch will be ours together, and you'll be my wife. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Wife. It had been so long since Evelyn had been anyone's wife, and she'd thought she never would be again. But hearing Luke say it, seeing the certainty in his eyes, she felt something shift inside her, the final wall crumbling, the last defense falling away. "All right," she whispered. "All right, yes. We'll do it. We'll be a family." Faith chose that moment to wake up, letting out a small cry that quickly escalated to full-throated wailing. Grace woke a second later, joining her sister in an impressive display of infant displeasure. And just like that, the heavy, emotional moment broke, replaced by the immediate needs of two hungry babies. Luke and Evelyn looked at each other and laughed, helpless in the face of such perfect timing. "Welcome to family life," Evelyn said, rising to prepare bottles. "It's all romance and deep conversation until someone needs a diaper changed." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Luke said, standing carefully with Faith. "This is real. This is what matters." As they worked together to feed and change the twins, the evening settling soft and golden around them, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be good again. That love could be found in the ashes of loss. That a family could be built from the broken pieces of other families, held together by choice and commitment and the simple decision to stay. Outside, the ranch hands were already beginning cleanup from the storm, voices calling to each other as they assessed damage and made plans for repairs. Tomorrow would bring hard work, difficult conversations, and the beginning of a new chapter none of them had planned for. But tonight, in the quiet kitchen with two babies and one good man, Evelyn Carter allowed herself to believe that everything was going to be all right. More than all right. It was going to be beautiful. The week that followed the storm passed in a blur of activity and careful planning. Sheriff Morrison came by 3 days after the fire, his weathered face showing both relief and resignation as he sat in Evelyn's parlor with a cup of coffee, going cold in his hands. "I've been thinking about those girls," he said without preamble, his eyes drifting to where the twins lay sleeping in their cradle. "Thinking about what's best for them, not what's easiest for me." "And what have you concluded?" Evelyn asked, though her heart was already hammering with hope. "That they need a mother more than they need an old bachelor uncle who doesn't know the first thing about raising children," Morrison said heavily. "I love those babies, Mrs. Carter. They're all I have left of my nephew and his wife. But love isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes love means knowing when to step aside." Luke, who'd been standing quietly near the fireplace, spoke up. "You're not stepping aside, Sheriff. You're choosing what's best for them. That takes a different kind of courage." Morrison looked at him with something like gratitude. "You saved them, son. Brought them here when they needed saving most. I reckon you've earned a say in their future, too." He turned back to Evelyn. "If you're willing, Mrs. Carter, I'd like to sign over guardianship to you. Legal and proper. The twins would be yours to raise as you see fit, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm willing. More than willing. Those babies have become—" She struggled for words. "They've become my reason for waking up each morning. I can't imagine this house without them anymore." "Then we'll draw up the papers," Morrison said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll still visit, if that's all right. Still be Uncle Tom to them. But you'll be their mother in every way that counts." "Always welcome," Evelyn assured him. "They should know their uncle, know where they came from." "We'll make sure they remember their parents, too, when they're old enough to understand." After Morrison left, promising to return with the necessary legal documents, Evelyn found herself on the porch again, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Luke joined her a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "You did good in there," he said, handing her one, giving him the dignity of choosing instead of just taking the babies from him. "He's their family," Evelyn said simply. "Just because I'm going to raise them doesn't mean I should erase where they came from." She sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. "Did you mean what you said? About earning a say in their future?" "Every word," Luke confirmed. "Those babies and I, we've been through something together. Sounds foolish, maybe, but I feel connected to them, like we're bound somehow." "It's not foolish," Evelyn said softly. "You saved their lives. That creates a bond that can't be broken." She paused, then added carefully, "You should be there when we sign the papers. As a witness, officially, but also because Because you're going to be their father, aren't you? When we marry. The words hung between them, making real what they'd only danced around before. Luke set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. Is that what you want? For me to be their father? I think it's what they need, Evelyn said. And what I want. But Luke, fatherhood isn't something you can do halfway. It's not just living in the house and helping with chores. It's being there for them, always. Through sickness and health, through good times and hard. It's putting them first before your own wants or needs. I know what it means, Luke said quietly. I helped raise my siblings, remember? I know about midnight fevers and endless questions and the way children can break your heart just by growing up. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite his calloused palm. I'm ready for it, Evelyn. All of it, the joy and the heartbreak and everything in between. Then we do this right, Evelyn decided. We court properly for a few months. Let people see that this isn't some wild impulse. We get the adoption papers finalized. We rebuild the barn and get the ranch running smooth again. And then, when spring comes and everything's settled, we marry. Spring, Luke repeated, a smile tugging at his lips. That's 4 months away. 4 months to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons, Evelyn said firmly. 4 months for people to get used to seeing us together. 4 months to build something real and lasting. 4 months is a long time, Luke observed, but he was still smiling. 4 months is nothing compared to forever, Evelyn countered. And that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? Forever. Forever, Luke agreed, squeezing her hand. I can wait 4 months for forever. But forever had a way of arriving faster than expected, and the path to it was rarely smooth. 2 weeks after their conversation, a woman arrived at the ranch in an expensive carriage, dressed in black silk that spoke of mourning and money in equal measure. She introduced herself as Elena Ward, and she'd come all the way from Philadelphia with news that shattered the fragile peace they'd been building. I'm Sarah Morrison's aunt, she explained, sitting stiffly in Evelyn's parlor while the twins napped upstairs. Her mother's sister. I only just learned of her death through a letter from Sheriff Morrison. I came as quickly as I could. Evelyn felt ice form in her stomach. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Ward. Sarah must have been very dear to you. She was my goddaughter, Elena said, her voice tight with grief. I helped raise her after her mother died. I was at her wedding. I sent gifts when the twins were born. She paused, composing herself. And now I'm here to collect them. To take them home to Philadelphia where they belong. No. The word was out of Luke's mouth before he could stop it. He'd been standing near the door, but now he stepped forward, his face hard. Those babies are staying here. Elena turned to look at him with cool, appraising eyes. And who are you, exactly? Luke Heron. I'm the one who found them after the attack. I'm the one who brought them here to safety. Then I'm grateful to you, Mr. Heron, Elena said, her tone softening slightly. Truly, but gratitude doesn't change the facts. Those children are my great-nieces. They're family. They belong with me. Evelyn found her voice, though it shook. Mrs. Ward, with all due respect, Sheriff Morrison has already agreed to transfer guardianship to me. The papers are being drawn up as we speak. Tom Morrison is a good man, but he's grieving, Elena said. He's not thinking clearly about what's best for those children long term. They need more than a ranch in the middle of nowhere can provide. They need education, culture, opportunities. They need a proper home. This is a proper home, Luke said, his voice dangerous. These babies have been thriving here. They're loved and cared for. You can't just show up and take them away. I can, actually, Elena said, though she didn't sound happy about it. I'm their closest living relative besides Tom, and I have the means to provide for them properly. Any judge would rule in my favor. Then we'll fight you in court, Evelyn said, though her heart was sinking. She knew Elena was probably right. A wealthy relative from back east versus a widow rancher in Nebraska? The law would favor blood and money every time. Please don't make this a fight, Elena said, and for the first time, Evelyn heard real emotion in her voice. I know you've grown attached to them. I can see that you've cared for them well, but they're all I have left of Sarah. Can you understand that? They're all I have left. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow because she did understand. She understood exactly what it felt like to lose everything and cling desperately to what remained. She understood grief and loneliness and the aching need for family, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. "When?" she asked quietly. "When do you want to take them?" "I have a hotel room in town," Elena said. "I thought I'd stay a few days, get to know them a bit. Then we'd travel back to Philadelphia together." She paused. "I'm not a monster, Mrs. Carter. I know this is hard for you, but I truly believe this is what's best for Grace and Faith." After Elena left, promising to return the next day, Evelyn went upstairs to where the twins were sleeping. She stood over their cradle, tears streaming down her face, as she watched their small chests rise and fall with each breath. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "We can't let this happen," he said fiercely. "We can't let her take them." "What choice do we have?" Evelyn asked brokenly. "She's right, Luke. Any court would side with her. She's family. She's wealthy. She can give them things we never could." "She can give them money and fancy schools," Luke said. "But can she give them what they really need? Can she love them the way you do, the way we do?" "Love might not be enough," Evelyn whispered. "It wasn't enough to save my daughter from fever. It wasn't enough to keep Thomas alive. Maybe love is never enough." Luke turned her around, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Don't say that. Don't you dare give up on them without a fight." "What kind of fight?" Evelyn demanded. "We have no legal claim, no family connection. We're just the people who happened to be here when they needed help. That doesn't give us rights to them." "Then we make it give us rights," Luke said. "We marry now, today. We go to town and get married, and then you're not a widow alone anymore. You're part of a married couple with a stable home and a working ranch. That has to count for something." "It's not enough time," Evelyn protested. "People will say we're only marrying for the babies, that it's not real." "Then let them say it," Luke said. "I don't care what people think. I care about keeping those babies safe with people who love them. I care about you and me and the family we're trying to build. Everything else can go to hell." Evelyn looked up at him, at this man who'd somehow become essential to her in just a few short weeks. He was right, she realized. They could fight. They could at least try. "All right," she said. "All right, yes. Let's go to town. Let's get married and show Elena Ward that those babies have a real family here. Maybe it won't change anything, but at least we'll have tried." They married that afternoon in the small church in town, with Sheriff Morrison as their witness and the preacher looking slightly confused about the rushed ceremony. Evelyn wore her best dress, the green one she'd worn to her first wedding so many years ago, and Luke wore clean clothes that Charlie had pressed for him. They spoke their vows quickly, urgently, as if speed could somehow make them more binding. "I, Luke Heron, take you, Evelyn Carter, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I, Evelyn Carter, take you, Luke Heron, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The words should have felt momentous, life-changing. Instead, they felt like battle armor, protection against what was coming. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Luke kissed her gently, and Evelyn tasted salt. Whether from her tears or his, she couldn't tell. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, driving the wagon in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The twins were with Mrs. Henderson, who'd agreed to watch them for a few hours. When they arrived to collect them, the older woman looked at them both and seemed to understand what had happened. "You got married," she said simply. "Good. Those babies need you both." "We're trying," Evelyn said. "We're trying so hard." That night, they put the twins to bed together, neither wanting to be apart from them for even a moment. Luke read them a story, even though they were too young to understand, his deep voice rumbling through the words of an old fairy tale. Evelyn rocked them afterward, singing a lullaby her own mother had sung to her. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night." When the babies were finally asleep, Luke and Evelyn retreated to the kitchen, both exhausted and neither ready to face the awkwardness of the marriage bed. They were legally husband and wife now, but the marriage had been born of desperation, not desire. There were proprieties to consider, feelings to navigate. "I'll sleep in Thomas's study," Luke said quietly. Same as I have been. We don't need to. I mean, this marriage is for the babies. We can figure out the rest later. Luke, Evelyn started, not sure what she wanted to say. It's all right, he assured her. I'm not expecting anything just because we said vows today. When things settle, when we're sure the babies are safe, then we can think about what comes next for us. Until then, I'm content to wait. Evelyn felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper, respect perhaps for this man who could have demanded his rights as a husband, but instead chose to give her space and time. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for marrying me, for fighting for them, for being patient. I'm fighting for us, Luke corrected gently. All of us. You, me, those babies. We're a family now, legal and true. And nobody, not Elena Ward, not any judge, not anybody, is going to tear us apart without the fight of their lives. Elena returned the next morning, and Evelyn met her at the door with Luke at her side, their unified front deliberate and clear. Mrs. Ward, Evelyn said, before you say anything, there's something you should know. Luke and I were married yesterday. Those babies now have 2 parents, not just one. We're a legal family. Elena's eyes widened, then narrowed. How convenient. A marriage that happens to occur just as I arrive to claim the children. The timing might be convenient, Luke said evenly, but the feelings aren't new. Mrs. Carter and I have been planning this for weeks. Your arrival just moved up our timeline. I see, Elena said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe them. Well, congratulations on your marriage, but it doesn't change the fundamental facts. I'm still the children's closest blood relative, and I still intend to take them home. Then let's make a compromise, Evelyn said, the idea forming even as she spoke. Stay here for a while. A week, maybe 2. See how the babies are doing. See how they respond to you versus how they respond to us. If, at the end of that time, you truly believe they'd be better off in Philadelphia than here with us, then we won't fight you. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but Evelyn couldn't think of any other option. At least this way, they'd have time. Time for Elena to see how much the babies thrived here, how loved they were. Elena considered this, her sharp eyes moving between Evelyn and Luke. 2 weeks, she said finally. I'll stay 2 weeks. But I'm not promising anything, Mrs. Heron. If I still believe Philadelphia is best for them at the end of that time, I'm taking them, and I'll get a court order if I have to. Fair enough, Evelyn agreed, though nothing about this felt fair at all. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Evelyn's life. Elena took a room at the ranch house, insisting on being close to the babies, and her presence changed everything. She watched constantly, evaluating every interaction, every decision. She questioned Evelyn's feeding schedule, suggested the babies needed more stimulation, criticized the makeshift cradle arrangement. They should have proper cribs, she said one morning, examining the dresser drawer where the twins still slept. This is quaint, but hardly appropriate for children of their station. Their station? Luke asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. They're 4-month-old babies, Mrs. Ward. They don't have a station. They have needs, and those needs are being met just fine. Are they? Elena challenged. Are you prepared to give them music lessons, foreign language instruction, introduction to society? These are Morrison girls, Mr. Heron. They come from good family. They deserve better than a rough life on a cattle ranch. They deserve love, Evelyn interjected, her patience fraying. They deserve to be wanted for who they are, not what they represent. They deserve people who'll hold them when they cry and celebrate when they smile. Can you give them that, Mrs. Ward? Or are you just trying to fill the hole Sarah left? It was harsh, harsher than Evelyn had intended, but Elena didn't flinch. Instead, her composure cracked just slightly, and Evelyn saw the raw grief underneath. Yes, Elena said quietly. Yes, I'm trying to fill the hole Sarah left. Is that so wrong? She was like a daughter to me. I loved her. I love these babies because they're part of her. Because when I look at them, I see Sarah's eyes looking back at me. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. You think you're the only ones who love them? You think you're the only ones who'd be devastated to lose them? Evelyn felt her anger drain away, replaced by a deep, aching sympathy. This wasn't a villain trying to steal her children. This was another grieving woman, trying desperately to hold on to the last pieces of someone she'd loved. "I don't think that," Evelyn said gently. "I know you love them. I know you're doing what you think is best. But Mrs. Ward, Elena, love means doing what's best for them, not what's easiest for us. And what's best for babies this young is stability, familiarity, people they already know and trust." "They don't know me yet," Elena admitted. "But they could, if you gave me the chance." "Then take the chance," Luke suggested. "Stay here, not as someone evaluating whether to take them, but as their aunt. Be part of their lives without trying to control every aspect. Let them have all of us, you, me, Evelyn, Sheriff Morrison. Let them have a big family that loves them instead of forcing them to choose." Elena looked at him, surprised. "You'd allow that? Even after everything I've said?" "It's not about what I allow," Luke said. "It's about what's right. Those babies lost their parents. They shouldn't have to lose anyone else if they don't have to. You want to be part of their lives? Be part of their lives. Come visit, write letters, send gifts. Be Aunt Elena who loves them and spoils them. Just don't take them away from the only home they've known since the tragedy." The words hung in the air, and Evelyn held her breath, waiting. This was the moment that would decide everything, whether they'd be able to keep the family they'd built or whether it would all come crashing down. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. When she turned back, her eyes were wet but clear. "All right," she said. "All right, I'll stay. Not for 2 weeks, just for a few more days. And I'll watch. Really watch. Not looking for flaws, but looking for truth. And then I'll decide." Those few days were tense but revelatory. Elena stopped criticizing and started observing. She watched as Luke paced the floor at midnight with a crying grace, his patience never wavering even as exhaustion pulled at his features. She watched as Evelyn tended to Faith through a bout of colic, her touch gentle and sure, her murmured words full of love. She watched as the twins' faces lit up when either Luke or Evelyn entered the room, how they settled at the sound of familiar voices, how they seemed to know, even at their young age, that they were safe here. On the 4th day, Elena came to breakfast with decision in her eyes. Evelyn's heart stopped, certain this was the moment they'd lose everything. But instead of demanding to pack the baby's things, Elena simply said, "Tell me about your plans for them, not just for now, but for later. For when they're grown." So they told her about the school they'd build on ranch land, bringing in a teacher so the twins and other ranch children could get a proper education. About the music lessons they'd arrange, bringing in someone from town once they were old enough. About the trips they'd take, showing the girls the world beyond the prairie. About the stories they'd tell of Sarah and Jacob, making sure the twins knew where they came from and how much their birth parents had loved them. "We can't give them everything a city could," Evelyn admitted. "We can't give them opera houses or museums or fancy society, but we can give them roots. We can give them land and sky and freedom. We can give them love that doesn't depend on them being perfect or proper. We can give them a home." Elena listened to all of it, her face unreadable. Then she stood and walked to where the twins lay in their cradle, looking down at them with an expression that broke Evelyn's heart. "Sarah loved you so much," Elena whispered to the sleeping babies. "She wanted you to have everything, every opportunity, every advantage. I thought that meant taking you to Philadelphia, giving you the life she would have wanted." She paused, wiping her eyes. But maybe what she really wanted was simpler than that. Maybe she just wanted you to be loved and safe and happy. And you are those things here, aren't you? You're all those things. She turned back to Evelyn and Luke, and there were tears streaming down her face. "I'm not taking them," she said. "I can't. They belong here, with you. They've already bonded with you in ways they never could with me, not at this age. It would be cruel to tear them away from the only parents they've known." Evelyn couldn't speak. Relief and gratitude crashed over her in waves, so powerful she could barely stay standing. Luke's hand found hers, squeezing tight. But I want to be part of their lives," Elena continued. "I want to visit. I want letters and photographs. I want to know them as they grow. Can you give me that? Can you let me be their aunt, even from far away?" "Yes," Evelyn managed, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course. They should know you. They should know all about Sarah and how much you loved her. You're family, Elena. You'll always be family. Elena nodded, composing herself with visible effort. Then I'll return to Philadelphia tomorrow. I'll write to you weekly, and I'll expect the same from you. And I'll visit every year if that's acceptable. I want to watch them grow, even if it's from a distance. You're welcome here any time, Luke said firmly. These are your nieces. This is your home too, whenever you want it to be. That evening, after Elena had retired to her room to pack, Evelyn and Luke sat on the porch again, watching the sun set over the prairie. The twins were asleep inside, safe and loved, and theirs. Truly, finally, theirs. We did it, Evelyn whispered. We actually did it. They're ours. They were always ours, Luke said, pulling her close. From the moment I found them, from the moment I brought them here. We just had to prove it to everyone else. Evelyn leaned into his warmth, feeling the tension that had gripped her for weeks finally beginning to ease. They'd fought for this family, fought hard, and they'd won. But more than that, they'd shown Elena Ward that love wasn't about control or ownership. It was about doing what was best for the ones you loved, even when it hurt. Luke, Evelyn said after a while, about our marriage. What about it? He asked carefully. We married in haste for the baby's sake. But I don't regret it. She pulled back to look at him. These past few weeks, fighting beside you, building this family with you, I've realized something. I didn't just marry you out of desperation. I married you because I wanted to, because somewhere along the way, without either of us quite noticing, I fell in love with you. Luke's breath caught, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. You mean that? I mean it, Evelyn said firmly. I love you, Luke Heron. I love your courage and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to give up on people. I love the way you hold those babies like they're made of spun glass. I love the way you look at me like I'm strong enough to weather any storm. I love you, and I want this marriage to be real in every way, not just on paper. Luke cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. Evelyn Carter Heron, he said, tasting her new name on his tongue. I've loved you since the night I brought those babies here, and you took them without question. I've loved you through every midnight feeding and every moment of fear. I've loved you in every way a man can love a woman, and I always will, forever. He kissed her then, properly this time. Not the chaste kiss of their wedding ceremony, but something deeper, fuller, a promise of everything to come. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. Come to bed with me, Evelyn said softly. Not to Thomas's study, but to our room. Let's start being husband and wife for real. Are you sure? Luke asked, always careful, always giving her the choice. I'm sure, Evelyn said. I'm sure of you, of us, of this life we're building. I'm ready, Luke. I'm ready for all of it. They went inside together, checking on the sleeping twins one last time before retiring to the bedroom that had been Evelyn's alone, but would now be theirs to share. And in the quiet darkness, with the prairie wind singing outside their window, they made their marriage complete, joining their lives and their hearts in the most fundamental way. Later, lying in Luke's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Evelyn thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The tragedy and loss, the fear and fighting, the impossible choices and desperate hopes. It had all led here, to this perfect peace, to this small family built from broken pieces. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? Luke asked, his voice drowsy and content. For being the kind of man who saves babies in the wilderness. For riding 30 miles when you were half dead from exhaustion. For staying when it would have been easier to leave. For loving me and those girls with everything you have. She paused. For giving me a reason to hope again. Luke's arms tightened around her. You're the one who gave me a reason to stay in one place. You're the one who showed me what home could feel like. You're the one who took in 2 orphaned babies and a broken-down cowboy and made us all into a family. He kissed the top of her head. If anyone should be saying thank you, it's me. Then we're both grateful, Evelyn murmured, sleep pulling at her. Both blessed. Both home, Luke agreed, and those were the last words either of them spoke before sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Morning came soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the bedroom window like honey. Evelyn woke to find Luke already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, Mrs. Heron," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband," she replied, testing out the word and finding it fit perfectly. "How long have you been awake?" "Not long, just lying here thinking about how different everything looks now." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "How right it all feels." Before Evelyn could respond, a wail from down the hall announced that Grace was awake and displeased about it. Faith joined in a moment later, their cries harmonizing in that particular way that twins seemed to manage. "Duty calls," Evelyn said with a laugh, throwing back the covers. "Welcome to married life with infants." "Wouldn't trade it for anything," Luke said, pulling on his clothes quickly. "You get Grace, I'll get Faith." They worked together with practiced efficiency, changing diapers and preparing bottles, passing the babies between them in an easy rhythm they'd developed over weeks of care. Elena emerged from her guest room as they were settling in to feed the twins, her traveling dress already on, her bags packed and waiting by the door. "You're leaving this morning?" Evelyn asked, surprised. She'd thought Elena would stay for breakfast at least. "I think it's best," Elena said, accepting the cup of coffee Luke poured for her. "The longer I stay, the harder it will be to go. And I need to go, need to get back to my life and let you get on with yours." She sat down at the table, watching as Luke fed Faith with gentle confidence. "But I meant what I said. I'll write weekly. I'll visit every year. I want to be part of their story, even if I'm not the main character." "You'll always be an important part," Evelyn assured her. "We'll tell them about Sarah, about how much you loved her and how much you love them. They'll know their Aunt Elena." Elena's eyes misted, but she blinked the tears away. "May I hold them? One more time before I go?" They let her take turns holding each twin, rocking them gently and whispering private words that Evelyn couldn't hear and didn't try to. This was Elena's goodbye, her moment to grieve what might have been while accepting what was. When she finally handed Faith back to Evelyn, her face was composed but her hands shook slightly. "Take care of them," she said. "Love them enough for all of us who can't be here. And Luke," she turned to him, "thank you. For saving them when no one else could. For being the kind of man who risks everything for children who aren't even his own." "They are mine," Luke said quietly. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. They're mine." Elena nodded, understanding. Then she gathered her things, accepted Luke's offer to drive her to town to catch the eastbound train, and left without looking back. Evelyn stood on the porch with the twins in her arms, watching the wagon disappear down the road, and felt the last piece of tension finally release from her shoulders. They were safe. The babies were truly, legally, permanently theirs. No one could take them away now. The weeks that followed settled into a new normal that felt less like surviving and more like actually living. The barn had to be rebuilt, and Luke threw himself into the work with the help of Charlie and the other hands. Evelyn would bring the twins out in the afternoon, laying them on a blanket in the shade, while she watched the structure slowly take shape. "You're doing it different from how Thomas built it," she observed one day, studying the new design. Luke paused in his hammering, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hope that's all right. Just thought we could improve on the original design. Better ventilation, stronger support beams. Thomas built a good barn, but I figure we can build a better one." Evelyn smiled at the careful way he acknowledged her late husband while still putting his own stamp on things. That was Luke's way, respectful of the past, but not imprisoned by it. "I think it's perfect." Thomas would approve of making improvements. He always said a smart man learns from what came before, but isn't afraid to try something new. "He sounds like he was a good man," Luke said, coming to sit beside her on the blanket. Grace immediately grabbed for his finger, her tiny fist closing around it with surprising strength. "He was," Evelyn agreed. "Good and kind and steady, but Luke," she turned to face him, "you need to know that loving him doesn't mean I love you less. They're different loves, for different times in my life. What I had with Thomas was real and precious. What I have with you is equally real and precious. Neither one diminishes the other." Luke lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I know, and I'm not competing with his memory. I just want to be worthy of you and these babies, whatever that takes." "You already are," Evelyn said softly. "You were worthy the moment you chose to bring them here, instead of taking the easier path." As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch thrived under their joint management. Luke proved to have a head for business that complemented Evelyn's practical skills, and together they made decisions that strengthened both the ranch's finances and its reputation. Word spread about the cowboy who'd saved 2 babies and the widow who'd taken them in, and people started going out of their way to do business with the Heron Ranch. "You're becoming local celebrities," Sheriff Morrison observed during one of his regular visits to see the twins. He'd taken to stopping by every Sunday, becoming Uncle Tom in truth as well as name. "People admire what you did, taking in those babies, fighting for them." "We didn't do it for admiration," Luke said, bouncing Faith on his knee while she giggled. "We did it because it was right." "I know that," Morrison said. "That's why people admire it. Doing the right thing when it costs you something. That's what character looks like." The twins grew and changed with each passing week, becoming more alert and responsive. They smiled now, real smiles that lit up their whole faces, and they'd started making sounds that weren't quite words but weren't just babbling either. Grace was the more adventurous of the two, always reaching for things just beyond her grasp, while Faith was contemplative, content to watch and observe before acting. "They're so different," Evelyn marveled one evening as she and Luke got the babies ready for bed. "I thought twins would be more alike." "They're individuals," Luke said, tickling Grace's belly until she squealed with delight. "Just happen to share a birthday and a face. But inside, they're their own people." He paused, his expression growing serious. "We need to make sure we let them be themselves. Not try to make them into copies of each other, or of what we think they should be." "Agreed," Evelyn said, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "We'll love them for who they are, not who we want them to be." Winter brought snow that blanketed the prairie in white silence, and with it came a visitor neither of them expected. Evelyn was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses outside, and when she looked through the window, her heart nearly stopped. 4 men on horseback, and even at this distance, she could see the hard look about them that spoke of violence and danger. Luke was out checking on the cattle, and Charlie and the other hands were scattered across the property doing various tasks. She was alone in the house except for the twins sleeping upstairs. The men dismounted and approached the house, and as they got closer, Evelyn felt ice in her veins. She recognized them from Luke's description. These were the outlaws who'd killed the twins' family at Dead Man's Crossing. These were the murderers who'd somehow found their way here. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the door, checking quickly that it was loaded, and positioned herself where she could see the front entrance while also keeping an eye on the stairs to the second floor where the babies slept. Her hands were remarkably steady despite the fear coursing through her. The knock came hard and demanding. "Open up. We know someone's in there." Evelyn said nothing, just kept the rifle trained on the door. "We're looking for a cowboy, Mte," another voice called. "Big fellow, dark hair, would have been through here about 2 months back. Might have been carrying some things that belonged to us." They were looking for Luke. They'd somehow tracked him here, probably asking questions in town, piecing together the story of the babies and their rescue, and now they were here for revenge or silencing or whatever passed for justice in their twisted minds. "Nobody here by that description," Evelyn called back, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Best move along." "Now, ma'am, we don't want any trouble," the first voice said, but there was something oily and false in the tone. "Just want to talk to this fellow, clear up some misunderstandings." "I said move along," Evelyn repeated, her finger moving to the trigger. "You're trespassing on private property, and I'm well within my rights to shoot trespassers." There was muttering outside, then the sound of the door handle turning. They were coming in whether she wanted them to or not. Evelyn took a breath, steadied her aim, and prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect her children. But before the door could open, a rifle shot cracked through the winter air, and one of the horses outside screamed and reared. The men scattered, and Evelyn heard Luke's voice, hard and commanding. "Next shot won't be over your heads. Get on your horses and ride out, or I'll drop every one of you where you stand." She moved to the window and saw Luke standing by the barn, his rifle raised, with Charlie and 3 other hands spreading out behind him. The outlaws were outnumbered and exposed, and they knew it. "This ain't over," one of them snarled. You can't watch your back forever, cowboy. Maybe not, Luke said, his voice carrying across the yard. But I can watch it today. And Sheriff Morrison knows all your faces. You so much as show up in this county again, you'll hang. Now ride. The men mounted up and left at a gallop, throwing curses over their shoulders. Luke waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle and running to the house. He burst through the door to find Evelyn still holding Thomas's rifle, her whole body shaking now that the danger had passed. "Are you all right?" he demanded, pulling her into his arms, rifle and all. "Did they hurt you? Did they get inside?" "No, I'm fine. The babies are fine," Evelyn managed. "But, Luke, they were looking for you. They tracked you here." "I know," Luke said grimly. "I saw them ride up from the north pasture, recognized them immediately. That's why I came in fast and got the men together." He pulled back to look at her face. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I brought this danger to your door. If they'd hurt you or the babies—" "But they didn't," Evelyn interrupted. "You got here in time. We're all safe." "This time," Luke said. "But they meant what they said. They'll be back or they'll send others. I can't let that happen. I can't put you and the babies at risk." Evelyn felt her stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to end this," Luke said. "Those men killed 5 people and got away with it. They think they can come here and threaten my family. I can't let that stand." "Luke Herron, you are not going after 4 armed outlaws alone," Evelyn said fiercely. "I won't allow it. We'll get the sheriff. We'll get a proper posse together." "By the time Morrison gets here, they'll be long gone," Luke argued. "And next time they come, they'll come when I'm not here to stop them, when you're alone with the babies." His jaw set stubbornly. "I have to do this, Evelyn. I have to make sure they can never threaten you again." "And what if they kill you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice breaking. "What if you ride out there and don't come back? Those babies will lose another father, and I'll lose—" She couldn't finish, couldn't voice the thought of losing him. Luke cupped her face in his hands, his expression anguished. "I'll come back. I swear to you, I'll come back. But I can't sit here knowing they're out there, knowing they could return any time. I won't live like that, and I won't make you live like that." They stood frozen, locked in that terrible moment of decision. Then Charlie cleared his throat from the doorway. "Begging your pardon, boss, but you're not going alone. Me and the boys, we all heard what happened at Dead Man's Crossing. We all know what those men did. If you're going after them, we're going with you." He paused. "Besides, Mrs. Herron's right. 4 against 1 is suicide odds. 4 against 6? That's more reasonable." Luke looked at his men, seeing their grim determination, then back at Evelyn. "If I take the men, you'll be alone here." "I'll be fine," Evelyn said, though her heart was screaming at him not to go. "I can handle the ranch for a few days. Mrs. Henderson can come stay with me and the babies. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," Luke said, sealing it with a kiss that felt like both farewell and vow. "I'll come back to you. Always." They rode out within the hour, 6 men on 6 horses, tracking 4 outlaws across the frozen prairie. Evelyn watched them go from the porch, the twins bundled in her arms, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Mrs. Henderson arrived that evening, took one look at Evelyn's face, and immediately took over the cooking and baby care, insisting that Evelyn rest even though rest was impossible. The next 2 days crawled by in agony. Every sound made Evelyn jump, certain it was either the outlaws returning or someone coming to tell her Luke was dead. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Morrison arrived with news. "They found them," he said without preamble. "Your husband and his men caught up with those outlaws at an abandoned line shack near the border. There was a fight." Evelyn's knees went weak, and she had to sit down. "Is he—" "He's alive," Morrison said quickly. "Luke's alive. Got winged by a bullet. Nothing serious. But the doc in town is patching him up now. 2 of the outlaws are dead, the other 2 are in my jail awaiting trial. It's over, Mrs. Herron. Those men won't be threatening anyone ever again." Relief crashed over Evelyn so powerfully she couldn't speak, could only sit there with tears streaming down her face while Mrs. Henderson made comforting noises and the sheriff shifted awkwardly. "There's more," Morrison said when she'd composed herself. "The outlaws had reward money on their heads. Turns out they'd been wanted for robberies and murders all across 3 territories. The reward money, It's substantial. Almost $3,000. That's yours and Luke's, split with the men who helped bring them in. $3,000. That was more money than the ranch made in 2 good years. That was enough to expand the herd, build a proper school, secure the twins' futures. We don't want blood money, Evelyn said immediately. Those men died because of what they did to the twins' family. Any money from their capture should go toward helping other victims. Noble sentiment, Morrison said, but there's a practical side to consider. That money could make your life a lot easier, could give those babies more opportunities. We'll think about it, Evelyn said. Right now, I just want my husband home. Luke returned that evening, his left arm in a sling, his face exhausted but triumphant. Evelyn ran to him, careful of his injury, and he caught her with his good arm, holding her tight. Told you I'd come back, he murmured into her hair. You got shot, she accused, pulling back to examine the bandage. Barely a scratch. Doc says I'll be good as new in a few weeks. He looked past her to where the twins were watching from their playpen, eyes wide at all the commotion. Are they all right? Were there any more problems? They're perfect, Evelyn assured him. We've all been perfect, just worried sick about you. That night, after the babies were asleep and Mrs. Henderson had returned to her own home, Luke and Evelyn lay in bed together, his injured arm between them, but their hands clasped tight. I was so scared, Evelyn admitted in the darkness. When you left, I thought I might never see you again. I kept thinking about how I'd only just found you, only just started building this life, and I might lose it all. I'm sorry I put you through that, Luke said, but it had to be done. Those men, they would have kept coming, kept threatening. The only way to keep you and the babies safe was to end it. I know, Evelyn said. I understand why you had to go, but Luke, promise me something. Promise me you won't do anything like that again without talking to me first. We're partners now. We make decisions together. I promise, Luke said. Though I hope there's never a reason to do anything like that again. I've had enough excitement to last a lifetime. Me too, Evelyn agreed. From now on, I vote for boring, peaceful, no more outlaws or life-threatening situations. Luke laughed softly. With 2 babies? Good luck with that. The winter passed into spring, and with it came healing. Luke's arm mended, the ranch prospered, and the twins grew bigger and stronger every day. They started sitting up on their own, then crawling, then pulling themselves up on furniture. Grace took her first steps at 10 months, with Faith following a week later, and suddenly the house was full of tottering, giggling babies getting into everything. Elena kept her promise about writing weekly, and her letters were full of questions about the twins' progress and stories about her life in Philadelphia. She sent gifts, beautiful dresses the twins immediately got dirty, educational toys they mostly ignored in favor of pots and spoons from the kitchen, books they were too young to understand but that Evelyn read to them anyway. In May, a full year after the tragedy at Dead Man's Crossing, Elena returned for her first visit. She stepped off the train to find 2 toddlers running to greet her, their faces alight with excitement at seeing the aunt they knew from photographs and stories. They've grown so much, Elena said, tears streaming down her face as she knelt to embrace them. Oh, my darlings, look at you, so big and strong and beautiful. She stayed for 2 weeks, and this time there was no tension, no evaluating, just the simple joy of family. She watched as Grace and Faith played in the new barn, chasing chickens and laughing with pure delight. She saw Luke teaching them to be gentle with the horses, patient with animals, brave but careful. She watched Evelyn braid their hair and wipe their faces and correct their toddler misbehavior with firm but loving hands. You were right, she told Evelyn one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Luke play with the twins in the yard. This is where they belong. I can see it now. They're not just surviving here. They're thriving. They're loved in a way that has nothing to do with duty or obligation. They're genuinely, completely loved. They are, Evelyn confirmed. They're the center of our world. Everything we do thinking about what's best for them. Sarah would be happy, Elena said softly, knowing they ended up here with you 2. She'd be grateful. The years rolled on like the prairie seasons. Hot summers and cold winters, spring planting and fall harvests. The twins grew from toddlers to little girls, bright and curious and full of questions. They learned to read from the teacher Evelyn hired, learned to ride from Luke, learned to bake from Mrs. Henderson, learned about their birth parents from the stories everyone told with love and sadness mixed together. On their 5th birthday, Sheriff Morrison brought them each a locket with a photograph of Sarah and Jacob inside, so they could always carry their parents with them. The girls looked at the pictures with solemn faces, trying to remember people they'd never really known. "That's my mama?" Grace asked, touching the photograph. "That was your first mama," Evelyn said gently. "She loved you so much that she hid you to keep you safe. She wanted you to live and be happy, and now Luke and I are your mama and papa too. You have lots of people who love you." "Are you sad they died?" Faith asked in her quiet way. "Yes," Evelyn said honestly. "I'm sad they died, and I'm sad you never got to know them. But I'm grateful they loved you enough to protect you, and I'm grateful I get to be your mama now." "We're grateful too," Grace said, hugging Evelyn fiercely. Faith joined in, and soon Luke and Uncle Tom were part of the embrace, all of them holding each other in the warm kitchen while the Nebraska sun streamed through the windows. When the twins were 7, they started asking questions about the day Luke found them. They'd heard the story before, of course, but now they wanted details, wanted to understand what had happened. Luke told them the truth, gently but completely, about the bad men and the brave people who died protecting them, about the long ride with 2 babies in his arms, about being so tired he could barely breathe but refusing to stop because they needed him. "Were you scared?" Grace asked. "Terrified," Luke admitted. "I'd never been so scared in my life. Not for me, but for you two. I kept thinking, these babies are depending on me. I can't fail them." "You didn't fail," Faith said firmly. "You saved us." "We saved each other," Luke said, pulling them both close. "You gave me a reason to keep going, and I got you somewhere safe. That's what family does. We save each other." By the time the twins turned 10, they were confident riders, helping with the ranch work alongside the hired hands. They'd become fixtures in the community, known as the Morrison twins who'd survived the Dead Man's Crossing massacre and thrived with the Herons. People spoke of them with a mixture of sympathy and admiration, seeing in them proof that good could come from tragedy, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Elena still visited every year, sometimes staying for months at a time. She'd become a beloved fixture too, Aunt Elena, with her Philadelphia stories and her generous gifts and her endless supply of hugs. The twins loved her not despite the fact that she'd once wanted to take them away, but without even knowing that had ever been a possibility. Evelyn and Luke had agreed never to tell them about that difficult time, seeing no reason to burden them with knowledge that might make them feel less secure. On a warm summer evening when the twins were 12, Luke and Evelyn sat on their porch, the same porch where so much of their story had unfolded, and watched Grace and Faith racing their horses across the prairie, their laughter carried back on the wind. "Do you remember," Evelyn said, "that first night when you brought them here? How you were so exhausted you could barely stand, but you wouldn't let them go?" "I remember," Luke said, taking her hand. "I remember thinking this woman is either a saint or a fool, taking in 2 babies from a stranger without question." "Maybe both," Evelyn said with a laugh. "I certainly felt foolish sometimes, especially during those first few months of night feedings and constant worry." "But never sorry?" Luke asked. "Never sorry," Evelyn confirmed. "Not for 1 second. Those girls gave me back my life, Luke. They gave me a reason to hope again, to love again. They gave me you." "I think it was the other way around," Luke said. "I was just drifting before them, going through the motions. They gave me purpose. You gave me home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughters play as the sun began its descent. The twins had Sarah's dark hair and Jacob's smile, but they had Evelyn's determination and Luke's courage. They were themselves, Grace bold and adventurous, Faith thoughtful and kind, but they carried pieces of everyone who loved them. "Papa," Grace called, racing her horse toward the house. "Mama, come see what we found." They walked out to meet the girls, who'd discovered a nest of prairie dog pups near the creek. Grace wanted to bring them all home, while Faith suggested they leave them with their mother where they belonged. "Faith's right," Luke said, ruffling Grace's hair. "Wild things need to stay wild, but we can visit them, make sure they're safe." "Like you visited us," Grace said. "When we were babies, you made sure we were safe. That's different, Luke protested. You're not wild things. Sometimes we are, Faith said with a rare grin. Mama says we're wild as coyotes when we don't want to do our lessons. Everyone laughed and they walked back to the house together, a family not bound by blood but by something stronger, choice and love, and the determination to build something good from something terrible. That night, after the girls were in bed, Evelyn found Luke standing in their old room, the one they'd turned into a proper nursery with real cribs years ago. He was looking at the dresser drawer they'd kept, the one that had served as the twins' first bed. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "Just remembering," Luke said. "That first night, how tiny they were. How I was so afraid I'd drop them or do something wrong. How you made it all seem possible." "We made it possible," Evelyn corrected. "Together." "Together," Luke agreed, turning to face her. "That's the only way it works, isn't it? No one can do it alone. Not parenthood, not love, not life. We need each other." "And we have each other," Evelyn said. "We'll always have each other. You, me, and those two impossible girls who made us a family." Luke kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 13 years of partnership and passion and profound gratitude. When they pulled apart, they could hear the twins giggling in their room down the hall, supposedly asleep, but clearly still awake and probably planning some new adventure. "Should we go tell them to settle down?" Luke asked. "In a minute," Evelyn said. "Let them have their whispers and their secrets. Let them be children while they can. There'll be time enough for responsibility and rules." They stood together in the doorway of that old nursery, remembering and being remembered, two people who'd found each other in crisis and built something beautiful from ashes. The Nebraska night wrapped around the ranch like a blanket, and somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other, their voices rising and falling in ancient song. Inside the house, a family slept, or pretended to sleep, safe and warm and deeply, profoundly loved. Two girls who'd survived impossible odds, a cowboy who'd ridden through death to save them, a widow who'd opened her home and her heart when it would have been easier to turn away. And in the morning, they'd wake to another day of life on the prairie, another day of laughter and work and small moments of grace, another day of being exactly what they were meant to be, a family. Not born, but chosen. Not easy, but worth it. Not perfect, but real and true and theirs. The story could have ended in tragedy at Dead Man's Crossing, with 5 bodies and 2 babies left to die in the wilderness. But instead, it ended here, in this house full of love and second chances, with 2 12-year-old girls sleeping peacefully in their beds, dreaming dreams that didn't include nightmares because they'd been saved by a cowboy who refused to give up, and raised by parents who loved them without reservation. Sometimes mercy writes a better ending than justice ever could. Sometimes the best revenge against evil is simply to live well, to love hard, to build something beautiful in defiance of those who would destroy. Sometimes a man too tired to breathe properly, clutching 2 babies like they're his last hold on heaven, is exactly the hero the story needs. And sometimes, on a ranch in Nebraska, under stars too numerous to count, a family sits down to dinner together and doesn't think about how they came to be. They just are, grateful and whole and home at last. That's where our story ends. Not in darkness at a river crossing, but in light at a dinner table, with 2 girls passing biscuits and 2 parents sharing smiles